While Russia's ground forces keep grinding forward and can show some small successes, additionally, the Russian Air Force keeps striking Ukraine's thermal power plants throughout the country, causing devastating damage. At least, though, there is some good news for Ukraine, as a new potent air defense battery is being announced to be given to Ukraine. But more about this in the situation report. The most prominent event of the past few days was the Russian attack against the Trypillia power plant. It's a thermal power plant somewhat south of Kiev, and it was completely destroyed in this attack. As you can see here on the image, this power plant will no longer produce any electricity and will probably have to be torn down. The attack was done with KH-69. That is a new version of the KH-59 that the Russians are using throughout the war already. The new cruise missile doesn't just have doubled the range from 200 to 400 kilometers. It also shows some stealth features and is an additional developments the Russians have shown throughout this war, where they introduce new weapons and adjust current productions to their new needs, as well as Ukraine, who also does the same thing, but it's another sign of the Russian developments of their weaponry. This is causing additional problems, as through the stealth features it's difficult to intercept, and Russia keeps striking power plants that are in regions that aren't that well defended, but the damage done to them is adding up at the same time and has caused a severe electricity crisis in Ukraine. Along the eastern front, we have fighting in the region of Kupiansk, but there is only one change in territory that I can record, and it's east of Terny. Here the Russians managed to advance somewhat on this wooden band here, somewhat to the west. In the region of Terny, we have a geolocalization here showing fresh Russian positions in this area here, where they managed to hunker down and gain some additional ground. South of the Seversky Donetsk, the fighting is also continuing. Bilohorivka is fighting. The fighting is also close to Vesele, is fresh fighting being reported, but I'm not able to record any change in territory. We do have, though, change in the region of Bahmut itself. Bodanivka is now fully under Russian control. This was to be expected. In the last situation report, I showed you the evidence of the Russians being in the southern part of town and in the northern part, while controlling the eastern side. That the Ukrainians would have to withdraw was obvious, and now the full town is under Russian control. Chasiv Yar, the attacks around it continue, and the Russians managed to bypass it on the south, or not bypass it, but basically advancing along the ridgeline here and on the southern lowlands of it, and have actually advanced quite a bit towards the canal, the the Donetsk canal that is east of Chasiv Yar. They are closing in on it and have attacked towards this canal over the past few days. While the pro-Ukrainian deep state map is still showing the western part of Ivanivske to be unclear in the gray area, not under Ukrainian not surely under Russian control, but in contested area, we can now assert that Ivanivske should be fully under Russian control as of now, as not only have we seen Russian military vehicles along this road here, we also have seen them recently fighting in this area. It's likely that there's still Ukrainian presence here in the wooded areas, but Ivanivske should be should be completely under Russian control as of now. At the very most, there's a few houses on the southwestern tip that are still Ukrainian held, but Ivanivske should have fallen by now as well. The Russians are also attacking close to Klishchiivka. Here we have a minor change in territory, where the Russians managed to advance along the tree line here. Here you see Klishchiivka in the southwest, and this is along this tree line they managed to advance. And if we look at it, it's close to the curvature of the road, so the Russians have managed to take a hold of this tree line here, also keeping up their pressure and advancing towards the west. Klishchiivka and Avdiivka itself, no fresh changes can be recorded, but obviously it's going to be doubtful how long the Ukrainians will be able to hold on to it now as Ivanivske has fallen. Further south at Avdiivka, we have additional Russian advances and attacks, the Russians managed to take control of the area here northeast of Berdichy. So far they had only been in this tree line here. Now it's fallen fully under Russian control, but the Russians also managed to advance in the direction of Ocheretine, where they managed to grab a hold of this area here where the railroad line is passing. They have occupied the rail line and the tree lines close to it, advancing somewhat in the northwestern direction towards Ocheretine. At the same time, while Berdichy has now the eastern side of the water of the lakes and the river here, or the river is under Russian control, we have a fresh geolocalization from a few hours ago where we see Russian tanks already attacking to the west of it. So in this area, Russians have recently also attacked. In this case, they were struck by Ukrainians, so we cannot assert that the Russians have control over those tree lines, but it seems clear that the Ukrainians are likely no longer in those, which means that a further advance to the west seems likely over the next few days. The Russians have now also occupied the area north of Pervomaiske. In the last situation report, I told you that that very late messages coming in right before the end of research for the last situation report were saying that the Ukrainians had evacuated this area here, this bulge into the Russian-held territory after losing positions in the north and positions south in Pervomaiske. Now it's confirmed that the Russians have occupied those tree lines there and have straightened out the front line to a certain degree. Further south, no real changes. Now fighting is continuing in Krasnohorivka, and there are indications that the Russians are probably still in this region. Now it's not completely sure whether the Ukrainian counterattacks managed to throw back the Russians in Krasnohorivka, but fresh geolocalizations indicate that fighting is still going on here, so it's likely that the Russians are still holding out in Krasnohorivka, which they had entered just a couple of days before. Further south, there is not much to report. Now we have an update about the map that supposedly the Russians are controlling this area now, but this is what I already told you in the last situation report, that the Russians are probably roughly having control over this area here, and the line of Russian control should actually be at least one block further west in Novomikhailivka, but there is no overall change in the situation. While the map has changed, the situation on the ground doesn't seem to have changed, at least according to what I can confirm. When we go further west, we have some news from the area of Velika Novosilka, where the two oblasts meet. Here the Russians have claimed that they managed to enter Uroshaine. This is unclear. There was no proof of it, but at the same time, there was a fresh geolocalization. This is this one here, where the Ukrainians managed to attack and take a Russian position. But according to this pro-Russian geolocalization, they evacuated the situation later. So if we believe the Russians here, then this is no longer under Russian control, but not under Ukrainian control at the same time, which the map would more or less indicate here. But with these geolocalizations being fairly fresh, it seems unlikely that the Russians have permanently entered Uroshaine. The best we could argue is that maybe they entered these houses here but were repulsed back. So as of now, we cannot confirm any Russian control over Uroshaine itself, over the town of Uroshaine. If we go further west at Orikhiv, I do not have any confirmed changes. Now fighting around Robotine is continuing, but we cannot confirm any change. The bigger news is, or we have some information about Krynky. Now this is more or less what Deep State Map holds as a contested area where the Ukrainian troops have presence in, and we have a fresh geolocalization here showing us two interesting positions where the Russians have been. Now look at this triangle here of the road, and then where the river meets, and this is right northeast of the triangle, and both are fresh Russian positions. So the Russians have been here and have been roughly here and roughly here already, and they have been right in the first row behind the behind the river, the Konka itself. So we can assume that the Russians are holding more or less this position here, which is unclear whether this means that the western part has also fallen, but it shows us an incursion by Russian troops into area that was more or less considered to be under mostly Ukrainian control. So it seems the bridgehead over the Dnipro at Krynky is shrinking as of now. Overall, Putin mentioned in a conversation with Lukashenko that the attacks on the Ukrainian power plants are motivated as a result, as an answer towards the Ukrainian attacks on Russian oil and gas infrastructure. This is a clear escalation from the Russian side, which basically tries to punish the Ukrainian side for striking the oil and gas infrastructure. And he's framing it as a demobilization, as a demilitarization at the same time, as obviously this will impede the Ukrainian defense industry's efforts to keep up with the demand or to meet the demand, as the Western aid is still lacking to a big degree. At the same time, Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, said that 500 companies are now involved in the defense industry and in producing goods for the needs of the military, and there are 300,000 people working in the industry inside of Ukraine, showing us the scale of the defense industry in Ukraine. And obviously, the majority of that production will need electricity, which is now becoming seriously under threat by the Russian attacks on it. We have some news about partisans as well, or partisans or sabotage. Vasily Prosorov, who is a former SBU officer who defected to Russia in 2019, was attacked in his car. There was a bomb planted in his car in Moscow, but he survived the attack with injuries to the legs and is in hospital right now, but will likely survive the attack. So this attack on a traitor failed. And in international support, we have news that Germany will hand over the third battery, a third Patriot battery, to Ukraine. This has to be seen in the context that Germany only ever had 12 of those batteries and has now pledged to hand over 25% of its strategic air defense to Ukraine. To put it in context, the US have handed over one battery out of 60 they have. This is 25 to 1.7% in aid that was given to Ukraine by the US in comparison to Germany when it comes to air defense, to strategic air defense. And this is what Ukraine is begging for, as the strikes are now devastating Ukraine's power plants that can't be protected. The country is simply too big, and Ukraine doesn't have enough Patriot batteries, which is the only air defense system that can more or less effectively defend power plants and other installations in its range. And for that, they simply have too few. But that was already it from me for now. A fairly short situation report for today. I hope you still found it informative. And if you liked it, I appreciate a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment what do you think about the current situation, or for instance about the US aid, especially in regards to it still being stalled in Congress, even though there is debate now that maybe now next week it might be on the agenda. But as far as I've seen, that's far from certain. But we talked about it here in the past that the Biden administration didn't do close to what it could have done either in the past. So leave your comment what you think about that situation right now. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. While I make it perfectly clear on which side I'm on in this conflict, I still think it's important to try to be as objective as possible and to try to stick as close to the truth, disregarding the own bias. But for full transparency, I never make a secret out of which side I'm rooting for, as I think this is a simple question of fairness towards the viewer. As we all know, there are some channels that claim to be neutral, and the message that is being transported speaks a very different a very different language. So if you appreciate this, I would really invite you to subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support the channel, which is only possible because of viewers like you, then you can do so by the means in the description. So thank you very much to everyone already supporting this channel. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.